I find myself standing at a crossroads, caught between the echoes of the past and the uncertainty of the future. It has been 2 years since my wife left me. After 10 long years of marriage, she walked away. But she didn't just leave. She left for another man, her lover. We have a daughter, a beautiful girl, who recently turned 11. As my wife packed her bags and closed the door on our shared life, she assured me that, throughout all those years, she had never been unfaithful to me. Not once. She simply fell in love, as she put it. She told me that I wasn't to blame, that I had been a good husband. But sometimes, she explained, life happens. The heart cannot be commanded. Accepting this was harder than I could have ever imagined. People often compare betrayal to the pain of a knife piercing your back, but that doesn't quite capture it. No, real pain is the death of a loved one, a hollow emptiness that nothing can fill. This was different. It felt like I had been dragged through the filth, submerged in a mire I could neither see nor escape. For half a year, she had been deceiving me, weaving her web of silence and half-truths. She told me later that she had already made her decision long before she had the courage to speak it aloud. She just didn't know how to tell me, didn't know how to wound me so deeply, despite knowing it was inevitable. It all started when she received a promotion at work. They sent her away, to another city, to oversee the opening of a new branch of the company. With her went her assistant, a young man who, though at first simply a colleague, would soon become much more. Together, they worked tirelessly, building the new office from the ground up, spending countless hours in close proximity. And, as these stories often go, they grew closer in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Or so she claims. Love blossomed where only work once stood. At first, she would come home once a month, staying for just a few days before the work would call her back. But soon, even those visits became scarce. And then, the phone call came. The one that would shatter the last vestiges of normalcy in our lives. She said she could no longer live a double life, no longer keep up the lies. She apologized, asked for forgiveness, said she couldn't continue deceiving me. We decided that our daughter would stay with me, at least for now. Her school, her extracurriculars, her friends, her life, in other words, were all here. My wife, now ex-wife, promised she would visit often, that she would still be present in our daughter's life. She would send money, call frequently, make sure our child would not feel the absence too deeply. The first year after she left, things went just as she had promised. She would call, send money, and visit our daughter. I could see how much our child missed her, and in those moments, it felt like we were making the best of a terrible situation. Yet despite her promises, I could never shake the gnawing emptiness inside me. The sting of betrayal haunted me relentlessly, creeping into every corner of my life. I found myself moving through the days in a haze, my mind never free of the thought that the person I had trusted most had walked away so easily. If it weren't for our daughter, who depended on me, I might have crumbled completely, sinking into the depths of despair. For that year, I didn't get involved with anyone else. I couldn't. The very idea felt foreign, as though I were still tied to a life that had unraveled right before my eyes. And then, without warning, after a year of tenuous stability, she vanished entirely. No calls, no money, no word. My daughter and I were left adrift, teetering on the edge of madness, trying to make sense of the silence. Months passed without so much as a whisper from her. We lived in a state of constant uncertainty, wondering if she had simply disappeared for good. Then, about 3 months ago, she returned, and her sudden reappearance felt like a ghost stepping out of the shadows. I had been ill, worn down by stress and anxiety to the point where my body could no longer bear the weight of it all. I was bedridden in a hospital, my strength sapped, when she appeared. Standing beside our daughter, as though she had never left at all, I was utterly stunned, my breath caught in my throat. Of all the things I expected in that hospital bed, seeing her again was not one of them. She said she would explain everything once I was well enough to leave, and I could feel the weight of her words pressing down on me. When the day came for me to be discharged, it was both my wife and daughter who came to take me home. The strangeness of it all felt surreal, as though I had stepped into a dream I didn't quite understand. Our daughter? her heart still aching from the absence of her mother, pleaded with me to let her stay with us for a while. She had missed her so deeply, and I could see how much it meant to her to have her mother back, even if only for a short time. Against my better judgment, I relented. I agreed to let her stay, but only for as long as it took for her to find new accommodations. There was no denying the importance of our daughter's feelings in this fragile arrangement. I made it clear that she would sleep in a separate room, sharing the space with our daughter, but never returning to the place she had abandoned. So, what happened to her? Why did she come back after all that time? The answer lay in the collapse of the company where she had worked. The headquarters of the firm shut down, and everything had to be sold off, piece by piece. My wife and her lover, who was not only her assistant but also her live-in partner, decided to seize the opportunity. They bought out the branch they had been running together and established their own independent business. At first, it seemed like things were going well, that they had built something successful from the ashes of the old. But then, inevitably, the moment arrived when the fragile facade shattered. She had been so blindly, desperately in love with this man that she had left her family behind, abandoned her marriage, and placed absolute trust in him, not only emotionally but also financially. That trust, of course, became her undoing. This was her second great mistake, the first being her decision to walk away from me and entangle herself with him in the first place. One day, without any warning, he drained every account, took everything they had, and vanished. He's now a fugitive on the run, wanted by the authorities. In the aftermath, she was left to pick up the pieces, scrambling to sell whatever remained to cover the mountain of debts that had fallen upon her. She found herself standing at the edge of ruin, without even a home to call her own. While she had managed to salvage a small sum, enough to potentially invest in a new venture, the life she had imagined was in shambles. And if I'm being honest, I didn't feel much sympathy for her. She had made her choices, had severed the ties that once bound us, and now she was paying the price. That night, as I lay in bed, I found sleep elusive. My mind churned with thoughts I couldn't silence. I could hear her and our daughter talking in the next room, their voices tense, as if locked in some quiet argument. "Just go, go already," my daughter urged, her tone sharp with impatience. And then, as the night crept deeper, just as I was finally drifting towards sleep, she appeared, without a word, without a stitch of clothing, and slid into bed beside me. Instinct took over. Before I could fully comprehend what was happening, we were tangled together, our bodies finding a rhythm we had long since forgotten. We didn't sleep until the early hours of the morning, the weight of what had happened hanging in the air between us. But when morning came, she leaned in again, pressing her lips to mine, her eyes full of tears. She spoke in halting whispers, calling herself a fool, pleading for forgiveness, telling me how desperately she wanted to turn back time, to repair everything that had been broken. But I couldn't just give in, not after everything. I told her that the night we had shared didn't mean anything. Not yet, at least. I wasn't ready to forget, to pretend the past hadn't happened. I needed time. Time to understand what I truly felt. Time to sort through the wreckage left behind. My supervisor at work, sensing the storm within me, handed me the address of a clairvoyant. It wasn't something I would normally pursue, but in a moment of desperation, I followed his advice and went to see her. Her words, however unexpected, struck me like a lightning bolt, casting my fate into stark contrast. She told me that I now stood at the crossroads of two distinct paths. The first path, she said, required me to summon all the strength within me, to find it in my heart to forgive my wife fully, without reservation. If I could do that, if I could lay aside my pride and embrace her once more with a heart untethered by the past, then the future ahead would be long and filled with happiness. She would love me more deeply than before, with a devotion stronger for the trials we had endured. We would have a second child, likely a boy, and together we would build a prosperous and stable life. My wife's dreams, now fraught with regret and uncertainty, would be fulfilled, but only with my help and unwavering support. The clairvoyant's voice was soft yet certain as she spoke of my wife's shame, the burden of her guilt. It weighed heavily on her, tormenting her more than she had let on. If I could resist the temptation to ever reproach her, to never hurl her mistakes back at her in moments of anger or frustration, but instead wrap her in tenderness, care, and affection. My patience and mercy would be rewarded. Gratitude would flow back to me threefold, and in the depths of her soul, the thought of another man would never even cross her mind. She had learned her lesson, the clairvoyant assured me, and for the rest of our lives, my wife's love would belong solely to me. Even our daughter's future would bloom with promise and joy. Then she laid out the second path. Should I choose not to forgive, if I cast my wife out and refuse her the chance to make amends, the consequences would be far darker. Our daughter, still young and impressionable, would side with her mother, leaving me behind. And from that moment on, my life would unravel. No other relationship would ever take root in my heart. Loneliness would close in like a vice, driving me toward a reckless spiral, drinking heavily, destroying what remained of my health, until I would live just 5 more years, forgotten by the world, dying alone. Worse still, my daughter's life would fall apart without my guidance. Deprived of her father's protection, she would drift into ruin, caught in the grip of her own misfortunes, sinking into a pit from which there would be no escape. Her life, which once held such promise, would be broken beyond repair, and I would have no power to save her. The clairvoyant's words echoed in my mind long after I left her home, the weight of my choice pressing down on me. My destiny, and the destinies of those I loved, were now in my hands. What man could make such a decision lightly? To forgive and forget a betrayal so deep, to open my heart again after it had been shattered, it was no simple task. Yet, she said, if I chose the first path, if I could find it in me to forgive, the journey would be made easier by turning to faith. We should go to church, she advised, and renew our vows before God. In doing so, the burden of my pride would be lifted, and I would find the strength to move forward. I find myself in a state of paralysis, an emotional fog that I can't seem to lift. After returning from the clairvoyant, I told my wife she could stay as long as she needed, that this was her home too. We now sleep in the same bed, and I eat the meals she prepares with genuine pleasure, something I hadn't done for so long. We talk, we even laugh together, the three of us, as though the fracture between us had never existed. But deep inside, I cannot yet bring myself to fully welcome her back into my heart. I want to, God, how I want to, but something unseen holds me back, an invisible barrier I can't seem to identify or tear down. There are moments when I ache to hold her tightly, to caress her endlessly, to whisper that I love her, to confess how deeply I suffered after she left, how excruciating it was to picture her with another man. I want to tell her how much I missed her, how her absence gnawed at me. Yet, some inexplicable force keeps me from doing so. Is it fear? Or is it pride? I cannot tell. Our daughter, on the other hand, radiates happiness. She tells everyone that her mother has come to her senses and returned home because she realized she loves only her father, missed him terribly, and that her dad, kind and noble as he is, has forgiven her because he loves her too. In her eyes, I am a hero, the perfect father, the embodiment of grace. I can't bring myself to shatter that illusion, but I also can't forget the words of the clairvoyant. Keeping up the appearance of a happy family for the sake of our daughter alone would ultimately be in vain. As for my wife's business plans, I will help her, of course. We've already begun discussing everything together. She seeks my advice, visits various offices, and consults with me every step of the way. I've assured her she can count on me, and I mean it. But when it comes to the rest of our relationship, can I ever truly trust her again? Can I ever look at her without fearing that, once she's back on her feet, she might gather her things and leave me once more? The thought of that happening again terrifies me because if I open up to her, if I bare my soul again, I know I won't survive a second betrayal. Perhaps I just need time. How much time? I don't know. But the clock ticks on, and while the future remains uncertain, the weight of this decision grows heavier with each passing day. Time may be the only answer, but whether it will bring clarity or more doubt is something I cannot yet foresee.